So welcome everybody to the Primary Care Commissioning Committee meeting for January. And we have apologies from Georgina, who can't attend this meeting. Do we have any other apologies, sir?
We just have apologies from Neil Hawkins. He was due to present item 6, but he's not able to join us today.
Oh, okay.
I think Neil's had problems with his Wi-Fi all day, hasn't he?
Yeah. He had problems with it yesterday too, yeah. Okay, well, we are quorate. Are there any declarations of interest? Ros, sorry.
Sorry, no, all I was going to say, Sue Hill was given apologies, so I'm just going to present the paper around the SAS scheme later on.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you have any declarations of interest that are not contained in our register? Okay, so the minutes from the previous meetings. Does anybody have any observations on accuracy? The committee able to accept those as an accurate record of the meeting? Yeah, okay. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 5. The action log, which is very slowly loading in the background. Sorry, I'm trying to be seamless, but we're going a bit slow. So we have one action, which I guess Neil can't answer, not being here. I don't know if he's given you any information there, Ross. It's about adding home working to the risk register.
Yeah, I think there's an email that Sue sent across to us, Sue Tulloch, and he said the potential risk around home working is covered within the generic IG risks. There's no need to add an additional standalone risk. I think that was whether that needed to be added, but Neil's confirming that it doesn't because it's covered by something already there. Okay. I just wondered if the additional health and safety risk is contained in that. From discussions I've had today, most of us seem to be at our desks for longer, taking less breaks with home working, less mobile, and also when you look at people's desk arrangements, not necessarily compliant with display screen equipment regulations, etc., etc. And I just wonder if that is a risk to the CCG in the future, if staff develop repetitive strain injury or musculoskeletal stuff from that kind of stuff. But I'll leave that for Neil to have a conversation with me, if that's okay. I'll just have a quick chat with Neil next time I see him. Okay, so we'll move on to item 6, the risk register report. Is anyone able to update us? So item 4 decision. In Neil's absence.
So I think the risks are as they stand in the report. I think the mitigations that are there are perhaps unchanged. I know Ros and I have both been contacted by the next person who manages the risk registers. We need to have a meeting just to have a little bit of a discussion on fine-tuning some of the risks, but apart from the one that's on the action log that you mentioned already, Jeff, I don't think there's any change to the risk ratings or the risks that we have overall, unless others would like to sort of comment or help us in our thinking on what the risks are as they currently stand.
I just wonder if the risk ratings currently reflect the pressure is being reported to us, and some of the I won't use the word deterioration because it's not the right word. I'd say that the lack of performance in areas where general practice doesn't have capacity or has been directed to not undertake certain activities in favour of the vaccination programme, for example, then some practices are likely to be moving away from achieving performance indicators in some areas where they just can't achieve them. And if that is a risk to us or a risk to the practices. I don't know if there needs just to have an eye on that. I know that obviously the risk of underperformance is in the risk register, but whether the mitigating controls at the moment are out of our control if practices are being told to focus on the booster program, the vaccination program, rather than certain other tasks that they might normally be doing.
Yeah, so I think your point that the residual risk score might actually be currently higher than 16 is valid. I think the reasons are perhaps more widespread, and currently the vaccination program, the challenge is getting people to come forward to be vaccinated rather than it eating into a huge amount of primary care capacity. But clearly staff sickness, absence, general being worn down by the whole sort of pandemic response and working in different ways, I think might alter that residual score. But I think that's the work that Ros and I are planning to do, but we'll very much bear that query in mind, and I think we would agree with it. I don't know if others feel similarly, or so the initial score was a red, a risk of 20, and we've set a residual score of 16 with a target of 8. But I think currently we're probably a little bit higher than that.
Yeah, just okay.
The states are being mitigated quite nicely by some of the work that we agreed earlier today in terms of the strategy and the support for people participating in that strategic work. And PCN development, it's an ongoing issue. My main concern with PCN development is trying to support PCNs to think beyond the delivery of general practice, to try and help PCNs to think about the community assets that they have, working with partners, and there's early signs that that's starting to happen, but I think PCN development is an ongoing risk.
Yeah. Okay, so is there an action to fall out of that conversation there, Dominic, for us to pick up with?
I think just to review it, once Ros and I have had the opportunity to meet with the risk managers within Next to fine tune these risks, and add in the one that you've requested.
Okay, thank you very much. You happy with that, Ros? Anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's fine. I think, we just need to have the meeting and sort of go over the risks and re-rate all of those, and then we can come back with an updated version at a later committee.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So item 7, Jill, is our finance report for month 9.
Yes. A couple of things to highlight in the report. One is to say that our reporting, it's been worked on a slightly different basis this year anyway, because of the way that funding has flowed, that we've had a budget for the first half of the year, which has become known as H1, and for the second half of the year, H2. So that's kind of shown on there. What we've also had is some other funds that I think bring a level of complexity, but hopefully not too much to our reporting. One is the Winter Access Fund, which is funding for the whole of the ICS, which flows through Newcastle Gateshead CCG as the host. And you'll see in there that's, excuse me, about £10 million, which will largely be passed out to other CCGs in order to spend on their local initiatives in month 10. I have to say that makes our viewing of our figures slightly less clear, but at the moment we've continued to work in that way because it's consistent with how we're reporting externally to NHS England as well, and that's always one of the most important principles that we stick to, that our internal reporting and external are consistent. The other, I guess, unusual aspect is how the additional roles reimbursement scheme funding is working this year. So we've had a percentage of that in our baseline budgets, but then we have to submit forecasts for how much we think we'll actually spend, and that shows us an overspend until the reimbursement effectively catches up with that. So again, that's part of what appears at first look to be a pressure, but in fact isn't. So on the appendix, although it appears that our forecast overspend is about 30 million, there's a little table below hand which shows how, when you take off the additional pressures that that we've had to forecast in order to be consistent with external reporting, that brings us to our underlying forecast underspend of £378,000. Just touching on that, and I suppose looking at a couple of points that are raised under the risks. We do have a risk of significant slippage because we have committed funds in a number of areas, both in our baseline budgets and in some of our in-year commitments that we recognise may not spend in full this year. But we are continuing to develop, working right across the CCG, continuing to develop non-recurrent spending plans to utilise that slippage as far as we can for the benefit of primary care. So in that way, we are still planning to end up at that forecast underspend as reported of 378,000.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions on the current month position? Okay, thank you. The committee able to receive that report for information.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item 8, an update on the special allocation scheme. Ros, you're going to present this on behalf of Sue.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So I think there's been a number of papers come previously about the special allocation scheme. It's something we tend to review on an annual basis. It is an enhanced service, so it does go out to practices within Newcastle and Gateshead to ask who wants to provide the service. I think for the last few years it's been the same provider, in that it's been Critters Park for Newcastle, and that also covers Northumberland and North Tyneside, and we have Beacon View for Gateshead, and that also covers South Tyneside. I think the paper was really just to say that we are commissioning the service with the same two practices for 2022-23. The reason for that is that the service is working very well. We did ask if any other practices were interested, and there was no interest from any other practices across either places. Nationally, there's actually a review of the special allocation scheme going on, so I think within the next year it would be good to see the results of that, because I think they're looking at potentially looking at a regional or even sort of an ICS based service. I think there's a few things we need to link in on that around, is that the numbers are increasing in this service, and additionally we've had some particularly awkward patients that have been within the SAS services that have then fallen almost outside of that, and we've needed a contingency service. So I think there's just a few considerations that need to happen as part of that review. But it would be good to have the review, but for 2022-23 the service will remain with the two providers, and I think that's as much as I need to say, unless there's any questions on any of that.
I think the review is timely given the changes to procurement, but also this scheme has been with the incumbent providers for a long time now. Even it was with them in its previous name, the scheme. So yeah, a review definitely, and looking at the numbers there of patients from the different areas, it's not an insignificant number of patients who may have to travel long distances to access primary care because they have been allocated to this scheme, and ensuring that the patients get the best possible service is really important. Travelling from anywhere in Northumberland to Critters Park, for example, is not necessarily a short journey. So yeah, definitely, and look forward to seeing that review. Anybody want to? Oliver, I see you.
Yep. Just wondering, having been involved in one of the processes, I wondered if there was the possibility for the review to consider access to advocacy to people who are entered into the scheme to improve the sort of quality and value of their responses. It feels that would maybe add a little bit in terms of value to the public and patient the confidence that the system is taking into account some of the complexities of the people and then that they're represented properly.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. And having been immersed in that process myself, Oliver, you're absolutely right that there is the perception could easily be drawn that there is an imbalance of power between the patient and the administrators of the system, and the rules in the system actually are not necessarily equally balanced between the patient and the provider either. So I think that's a very, very valid point. Absolutely. Ros, Dominic.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it was just to say on the back of that we've actually sort of got a working group with NHS England, and we're looking at widening that to sort of LMCs, to Health Watch, to anyone we think that would need to take part in that, to sort of hear their voice on sort of the review of the service and how it may need to look in the future. So I think it's really important that we have all the right people at those meetings that can inform the decision before we just come up and say this is the service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Dominic?
So I think Oliver's suggestion is a very valuable one, and I think could dramatically enhance what we do if we also included within the spec the requirement for advocacy. But I would suggest it should be professional and trained advocacy, and I think it could work for both the patient but also for the service as well, because I think, you know, we mustn't underestimate some of the challenges that some of the patients in the special allocation scheme present. That they're there for a reason, and some of the issues that we've had to deal with even relatively recently was severe verbal aggression, racism that was overt, and so these patients can sometimes create a lot of problems for the services which they do need to use and have a right to. So I think an advocate could also support the patient to be more appropriate in services, and to that will lead to better outcomes for all. So I think it's a really valuable suggestion, Oliver.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions about the scheme or the report? No. So are the committee happy to receive that report? Thank you very much. So we go to item 9, which is for information, and it because the last meeting was not able to take place, I was asked to approve a chair's action to approve additional resilience funding to support seriously ill patients whilst waiting transport to hospital. Dominic, do you want to say anything on the background to this?
Yeah, so North East Ambulance Service was experiencing extreme pressures in the few weeks after Christmas. Thankfully, these look like they're lifting slightly, but one of the impacts of those pressures was that when practices were calling for Category 2 ambulances, so that's for patients who are having clinical conditions such as acute strokes, heart attacks, etc., you know, so people that are significantly unwell, the average response time was being reported at 80 minutes, I think, but the reality was some practices were experiencing delays for ambulance retrieval up to about 6 hours, and quite poorly people were having to be cared for in practices on oxygen, requiring a lot of monitoring, and similarly very ill patients were having to be transported to hospital via alternative means, which would carry some clinical risk, but taxis and we did have a sort of Gateshead Hospitals transport service for a small period of time. So this was just to recognise that practices were incurring additional unexpected costs to both compensate for the ambulance trust pressures, but also to keep patients safe. So it was our feeling that even though we had offered practices 45 pence per head resilience funding, which translated into a few £1,000s per practice, not a huge amount of money, to sort of support them with staffing and other pressures over the winter. We felt it was the right thing to do, to give them a little bit of additional money to pay for some ad hoc expenses that they were incurring as a result of supporting ambulance trust pressures. So we approached Jeff and asked him for chair's action on this. We felt we had enough slippage in our budget to afford it, and we just want to bring that decision to the committee for ratification and approval at this point.
And on the basis that that small amount of funding could make a significant contribution to the long-term outcome for some patients, then it was, in my view, that small amount of money was money well spent at a time of significant pressure within NIAS, but also within primary care. So whilst it's for information, I'd ask the committee to ratify that decision. Okay.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. And there is any other business, is there, that I am aware of? Dominic, do you have any other business?
No.
Our next meeting is the 22nd of February, unless anybody else has anything they would like to discuss.
Chair, I need to give you my apologies in advance for that meeting.
Okay, it is at half term, isn't it? I don't know if anybody else will be giving apologies at half term. I'm not sure if Georgina will be able to attend, but we'll have to look at how.
Is it half term? I'm not at half term, but I'm not in the car, so I can't check my diary to see if that's half term or not. Sorry.
So most half terms start on the 21st of February.
Yeah.
Oh, well, there we go. Yeah, sorry. My apologies for the next meeting as well. Then, thank you.
No, that's fine.
Mine as well, Jeff. So you might not be quorate.
Yeah, we won't be.
I might have to give mine as well.
Yeah, and depending on the outcome of the conversation, I have a bill before we started.
Well, quite. I
But
was about to raise that. Now, you're going to get away with this because you're going to sneak off and ski whilst you think the meeting's not quorate.
I think, well, the meeting won't be quorate without Georgina or Dominic, because we would need one or the other, and Bill or Bill. So out of the three, we need two of you. If we only have one, we would struggle, and if we don't have Lynn, we would also struggle. So Sue and Dominic, could you look at a date change to either week after would be preferable for me, but it's not based on me. It's just yeah.
Jeff, it would also be pertinent for the private meeting as well, won't it?
Yes. Yeah, it would. Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Yeah.
Let's go look at that.
If you could look at that and circulate email, is that okay?
Yeah, I'll do that.
So. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I look forward to seeing you sometime in 4 weeks' time, 5 weeks' time.